For the congressional perspective, I want to go now to a seasoned Congressman, Jim Sensenbrenner. He won his 19th term in the U.S. House with nearly 70% of the vote. To start the conversation, here is President Obama reacting to the Republican control of the House and Senate. Watch this.
To everyone who voted, I want you to know that I hear you. To the two-thirds of voters who chose not to participate in the process yesterday, I hear you too. All of us have to give more Americans a reason to feel like the ground is stable beneath their feet, that the future is secure, that there's a path for young people to succeed, and that folks here in Washington are concerned about them.
Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, your reaction to that. The president says he represents two-thirds of Americans. You only represent the one-third that just voted.
No, I don't represent the one-third that just voted. In my county, 80% of the people voted. That's because we decided we were going to get every Republican to go to the polls. It worked. Scott Walker won. I won. We gained Republicans in the legislature. We elected a Republican attorney general. That's because the people who went out to vote cared to vote to send a message in terms of the type of changes that Governor Walker has led the fight for under great odds and at great personal sacrifice, and they wanted him back.
And what's the national message here? What's your takeaway? What are you hearing from the electorate?
Well, what I'm hearing from the electorate is good thing the Republicans got control of the Senate so that Harry Reid isn't throwing good legislation into the wastebasket or forgetting about it. We want to have a good budget. We want to deal with energy so that we can become energy independent, starting with the Keystone XL pipeline. We want to see a rollback on wasteful spending, and we want to see states empowered. That's what Republicans have run on. That's what Republicans are going to do. And if the president decides to get his veto pen out, then he's going to have to be the one who explains why he's obstructing government.
Now, the president, as we were talking with Laura Ingraham a moment ago, the president is willing to go it alone. In fact, he's defying the Republican Congress and saying, look, I'm going to move and pass some kind of immigration reform using my executive pen, with or without you. Your reaction to that?
The Constitution has separation of powers, and one of the provisions in the Constitution is that immigration and naturalization are the prerogative of the Congress. The president, in terms of some energy and climate change stuff, has basically picked up things that were rejected even by the Pelosi-Reid Congress of 09 and 10. And the president had better realize that one of the reasons why the people spoke the way they did was because they were opposed to executive amnesty. And if the president decides to do that one way or the other, I think he's going to paint himself into a further public relations corner.
I want to roll this by. This is your speaker, John Boehner, reacting to the president's suggestion that he will unilaterally move on immigration reform. Listen.
But I've made clear to the president that if he acts unilaterally on his own, outside of his authority, he will poison the well, and there will be no chance for immigration reform moving in this Congress. When you play with matches, you take the risk of burning yourself. And he's going to burn himself if he continues to go down this path.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, there has been talk of impeachment if the president moves in this direction. Do you see an impeachable offense here if the president were to move unilaterally on immigration reform?
Well, it's hard to say. I gave the opening argument in the Clinton impeachment, and we don't have two-thirds of the Senate, and the president will end up staying in office because all the Democrats will completely ignore the fact that the presidential oath requires him to faithfully execute the laws. Laws are passed by Congress on that. I think that people will view this as an overreach by the White House, just as he's overreached on a lot of EPA regulations, and his approval rating will take another nosedive.
What is in your arsenal? What can you do if the president says, here's the executive order, we will stop deportations, we're going to find a way to bring relatives of the people who are here, bring them in, put them in a queue, and give them all citizenship in time?
Well, first of all, the president can't sign an executive order granting anybody citizenship. That's clearly unconstitutional. Where the president has got a problem is that if he legalizes millions of undocumented people who probably would go into low-skilled and labor-intensive parts of the economy, he basically takes jobs away from African Americans. That's going to be a problem that he has to deal with. And you'll have two groups in the Democratic coalition, the African Americans on one side and the Hispanics on the other, who there's no way that doing this can please them both. Now, you know, what we need to do, number one, I think, is enforce the laws we already have. Number two, we shouldn't turn our backs on legal immigration. But if legal immigrants and illegal immigrants are treated the same way, we will slowly close the door to legal immigration, which would be a terrible tragedy for our country. We do need to secure the border, and I think that the president, in allowing these kids from Central America to jump the fence by the thousands, basically has made it difficult to pass any type of immigration reform bill for the next several years.
As you know, the bishops of the United States, the Catholic Church of which you are now a member,
yes,
these leaders are saying we should have comprehensive immigration reform, and there should be some sort of welcome to the people that are here. You would say what to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, I was taught it was a sin to break the law, and they are breaking the law. So what part of illegal don't they understand? They would come back to me quoting Matthew 25, where the Lord says to welcome the stranger. I believe in welcoming the stranger. That's the stranger who knocks on the door, not the stranger who breaks into your house.
Okay. Let's move on to what would a GOP plan look like if you had to draft it? Because we are hearing in the winds here that a GOP immigration plan has to be drafted, is in the works. Would it be mostly enforcement and what you just said, observing the law?
Well, there are several things that we have to do relative to enforcement. You know, one is to secure the border. Secondly, the GOP, I think, will push allowing state and local law enforcement to enforce the immigration law, which is not done in most cases now. The third thing I think that we need to do is to look at areas where we have real problems in our economy and have a temporary visa program for people in agriculture, and temporary means temporary, meaning you go home when you're supposed to. And we need to deal with high-tech visas because it doesn't make any sense to educate high-tech people from abroad and not have the visas for them to work helping us grow our economy, and instead sending them home so that they will compete with us. That doesn't make any sense.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, I want to move on to Obamacare. This was a part of so many of these races across the country. So many of the GOP candidates raised this. It obviously resonated with voters. Do you have a mandate to repeal or adapt parts of Obamacare, fix the problems?
Well, I don't think Obamacare can be fixed. I think we've got to repeal it and start over. Now, there are some parts of Obamacare that I think are very worthwhile. For example, getting rid of pre-existing conditions exclusions. I think if we had a vote up or down on that, it would pass unanimously with everybody, Republicans and Democrats, voting for it. Where the sticky parts of Obamacare are the employer mandate, which kicks in, the individual mandate that kicks in, and runaway insurance premiums. Because after all, Obama, in one of his many promises that were broken, did say that the average reduction in premiums would be $2,500. And there are not going to be very many people that come even close to that. Most of the people will have increases in their premiums.
So what do you do? What are you going to do? I mean, Congressman Boehner has already said, we plan on moving a repeal bill.
I support that.
You think it'll get through the Senate?
Well, if it's part of a reconciliation bill which only needs 51 votes and can't be filibustered, yes. And there'll be a lot of other things that would be in that reconciliation bill that are very, very attractive, such as an overhaul of the tax code where the top marginal rate would go down and a lot of special interest exclusions and deductions would become history.
Let's talk about the budget and NSA, which I know are two issues very near and dear to your heart, being the author, really, of the Patriot Act in large part. What is your vision in those two areas?
Well, first of all, in the budget, we have to pass a budget that gets to a balanced budget within 10 years. I'd like to see it done sooner, but it is going to...
How about 5?
Well, okay, yeah. Well, and how about 2? You know, we'll have a betting contest.
I'm with you.
But it's going to have to require changes in entitlement programs. And we haven't had the budget reform that we've needed because the Democrats have stuck by saying we shouldn't have any changes in entitlement programs at all. Well, Social Security will run out of money by 2033, and the sooner we deal with how to fix Social Security, the fewer people are going to get hurt. And Republicans have proposed in Paul Ryan's budget that we not affect anybody's Social Security if they're older than age 55, but we've got to figure out better ways for people who are under 55 to have more money paid on their tax dollars through various kinds of self-directed investments, just like we do with IRAs. But that's not a privatization. What should we do with the NSA and its surveillance? Well, we've got to get rid of bulk collection on Americans to begin with. The Freedom Act, which I sponsored and which the House passed by an over a 3-to-1 margin, is currently pending in the Senate. We do need to have some surveillance, but targeted on people who would do us harm. And there, the administration and the intelligence community can go and get a warrant saying Mr. X or Miss X we know is plotting to do us harm. We would like to get all of the records and find out who they're talking to. That's something that we ought to do to protect Americans. But to say that every phone call and every text and every email that is made by an American ends up going into a government storage bin to be retrieved whenever they want to is not in the American interest, and I think it is not consistent with the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures.
Yeah. I want to move to the personal, if you'll permit me for a moment.
Of course.
Okay. There was a big story in August where you converted to the Catholic faith. Now, every time I'd met you before this, you described yourself as an Anglican Catholic, and you have been a faithful Anglican for a long time. What brought you over?
Well, I would say the Holy Spirit did, with a slight push from Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah, I heard that. And there was a crisis in your own family and in your life.
Well, the day before Mother's Day, I found my wife unconscious on the floor of our house, and she had suffered a brain aneurysm. When she got to the hospital and the doctors did the CAT scan, they said that she only had a 3% chance of survival. Wow. Well, somehow Cardinal Dolan, heard that I was, having both a spiritual crisis as well as a physical crisis in my family, and he was kind enough to spend some time having a couple of pastoral calls with me. Now, I got to know Cardinal Dolan very well when he was the Archbishop of Milwaukee. I think he's a very patient man because he'd been working on me for about 12 years.
Well, it took him a long time, but we're glad you're finally in the fold.
Well, thank you.
Congressman Sensenbrenner, thank you for being here. We will be in touch in the coming days.
Absolutely.